Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining. Welcome to our webinar, Painting Scotland Yellow, How Can We Bring Back Aspen? My name is Kirsten Brewster and I'm Wildlife Comeback Lead at Scotland, the Big Picture. I'm going to start with a little bit of technical housekeeping. We've got both the Q&A and the chat function enabled tonight. To ask a question, please use the Q&A function. You can also upvote comments in there so that we can know those are the popular questions. You're welcome to use the chat to introduce yourself and connect with others, but please note we won't be answering any questions in the chat this evening. Painting Scotland Yellow came about to raise awareness of aspen as a vital but scarce tree, often found in scattered fragments because it is so palatable. We need to collectively take action to restore aspen across Scotland. So this is a campaign founded on partnership. A long list of organisations have agreed to support, share and amplify Painting Scotland Yellow to raise awareness of aspen, its importance, and to encourage action to see restoration of not only aspen, but the important species upon which it depend. If you want to learn more, please visit our website, Google Painting Scotland Yellow. Painting Scotland Yellow is also crucially a searchable hashtag, which means that anyone, anywhere can use this on social media platforms to draw attention to their work, whether that's a new research project, a call for volunteers, or people to collect and plant out aspen. So please do make use of this as a means of connecting people and initiatives. Visibility helps knowledge to be shared between communities. It's been a pleasure to work on the Painting Scotland Yellow project to date and see the short film come to fruition. Through the project, we've run a number of events, such as the aspen propagation training at Trees for Life Dundregan Nursery, which has had glowing reviews on both occasions, and we hope to run this again next spring. We've also had a learning day at Mar Lodge in Deeside on the 17th of October to look at aspen through the lens of native woodland restoration and herbivore management, and that's aimed at land managers. If you're interested in either of those, then my email will be on the screen later. Please get in touch. The story of aspen in Scotland is fascinating, and I've learned so much by speaking to others, and that's really what inspired the film. I wanted to share more of that story and those insights with other people and inspire action at all scales. There are so many others involved in Action for Aspen, and it's this collective effort that is so vital. We're going to play the short film for you now. Those of you who have already seen it will be lucky enough to watch it again for a second viewing. And afterwards, we're going to move on to a discussion with our guest panelists, and then we will open up to audience questions. I hope you enjoy the film.
I think aspen previously was quite an under-recognised species. It was forgotten about, and it's a key part of the Caledonian forest, which once was in the Scottish landscapes.
It's definitely rarer than it should be, and that's because of land management practices that go back millennia.
Aspens are a really important species. You have a whole assemblage of species exclusively associated with aspen.
It's a very important tree to our woodlands here. It is a pioneer species, and it is one of the first to colonise bare grounds and makes way for the next generation of trees that require a more nutritious soil.
I think it's fair to say that in recent centuries aspen's fallen on hard times in Scotland. What we found here is it's the thing that will be eaten first, given half a chance by any deer or sheep that happen to be in the area. That's primarily just because of the ecology of the species. It grows very fast, it puts a lot of nutrients into its leaves, which means that in normal circumstances it can grow very well and very quickly. The problem comes when you have several centuries of high herbivore densities. At that point aspen can really begin to suffer, basically because it's just so tasty.
Aside from herbivore browsing, one of the other challenges for aspen is reproduction. It's a dioecious tree, so there are male and female trees, and so naturally there should be sexual reproduction, so there should be flowering and seed setting from that. In Scotland, we don't often see widespread flowering. It can happen every 30 years. So when that doesn't take place, aspen can vegetatively reproduce. It spreads from its root system, so it suckers from the roots, and you see these new kind of saplings coming up from the roots. which sounds great, but the challenge with that is that all of those suckers will be a genetic clone of the parent tree. And so we don't then see that genetic, variation, resilience that we would hope for.
We've quickly built up this picture of just how important aspen is. You have a whole assemblage of species that only live on aspen, exclusively associated with aspen. The aspen bristle moss, the aspen hoverfly, all these kind of things.
It has a lot of ecological relationships with different species. For example, beavers really like aspen, but also there's a lot of mosses and lichens that depend on aspen.
Beavers and aspen are like salt and pepper, fish and chips. They've evolved together. They actually need one another. It's not just good for all its ecological benefits. We know foresters love aspen because it's a blooming useful tree. It can be highly productive. It's a highly tolerant species that will grow pretty much anywhere.
Aerial surveys were conducted across the space side and the D side to monitor aspen, and then that was pinpointed on a map, and then we use this map to go then on the ground to actually prove that aspen is present, and then we go even further in detail and see what ecological condition those aspen stands are in. There's a really good strongholds of aspen woodlands within those space side and D sides, but unfortunately they're really small isolated populations.
Although aspen does have maybe a bit of a stronghold in the Cairngorms, there are larger stands here, there are stands that have been protected. Actually, aspen should be present all across Scotland, so including, the mainland, the islands. It's a missing tree in our landscape, and I think when something is missing, it's easily forgotten.
It's a rare species in Renfrewshire. When we started, there was only 5 original wild aspen trees left in the whole of the county.
We need a whole community focus of stakeholders, the communities that have aspen even within their gardens as well, to just connect aspen back up to allow those priority species to expand.
It's so important that we have a good understanding of where aspen still is clinging on. So if you've got it on your own land, a great opportunity now that you recognise the value of this resource to think, what can you do about it?
We've created a clone collection to preserve the different genes of each of these surviving trees that are typically isolated in the wild. We're preserving the genome, if you like, of the population, but it's a means then to propagate material off of these stock trees that we grow to create new trees that we can then plant out, mixing up these different clones together in the hope that eventually they'll cross-pollinate, flower, produce seed and reproduce.
Aspen only flowers very irregularly, and of course without flowering we don't get any seed. In order to collect seeds, we've had to create a seed stand here on the nursery. Aspen flowers after a period of stress. So we try and mimic that here on the nursery by putting these trees under a wee bit of stress to encourage flowering the following year. And our main method of doing that is through bark work, which you can see here on the main stem of this tree. When the flower buds develop, we can then collect the pollen from the males and paint it onto the female catkins. Once the female catkins have been pollinated and the pods have started to split, we can collect the catkins, just wee seeds like this. And once we're at this stage, we can sow them onto compost. So after we've sown aspen, it can germinate within 24 to 48 hours. And from 1 gram of seed, we can get up to 3,000 aspen seedlings.
You can see there's an awful lot of naturally regenerating pine-dominated woodland here. I think there's an expectation that pine will be, a major constituent of Caledonian pinewood, but actually from a biodiversity perspective, it's really good to have a mix of species, particularly birch, willows, rowans. But aspens have a really major part to play in this.
In the future, we would like to see aspen everywhere. We would like to bring back this priority species, which is so isolated, and really connect that back up and make it bigger and better and more resilient and better for the future.
Painting Scotland Yellow is a great initiative to actually showcase how important the tree is, how beautiful it is, how beautiful in the landscape, and how valuable it is.
Aspen really boosts the kind of biodiversity around it. Often we think about maybe oak trees as having so many dependent species and hosting a wide variety of life. I would like to think of aspen in Scotland in a very similar way and just think about what we're missing when we don't have that within our landscapes.
Well, I hope that was an enjoyable watch for everyone. Many thanks to my excellent filmmaking colleague Mark Larkin, who pulled it together. And if you'd like to watch again in full HD or share with a friend, you can find the film on our YouTube channel. Just search Painting Scotland Yellow. I'm now joined by a few familiar faces from the film. We have Andrew Painting, Conservation Officer at National Trust for Scotland's Mar Lodge estate, the UK's largest national nature reserve. We're also joined by Heather McGowan, Nursery Assistant at Trees for Life's Dundragon Nursery, and finally Peter Livingstone of Eadha, a social enterprise specialising in the growing of aspen at Loch Winnock, southwest of Glasgow. Welcome everyone. Hello.
Hello.
So to kickstart us, I just wanted to invite each of the panellists to say a little bit about the importance of aspen for them. Peter, would you like to start?
Pressure's on. Well, thanks for that, and good evening, everyone. So, yeah, I mean, I guess aspen is seen to be like the neglected tree in Scottish forestry, basically. I'm not a forester, neither I am an ecologist, but having read and learned and worked with aspen, and then speaking to people in the forestry industry and the conservation sector, it's apparent that there's a great belief in the importance and the value of aspen, and the sort of the frustration, if you like, that there's not more of it to plant, and more knowledge about it, really. Despite all these organisations working with it, there still seems to be a lot of unknowns, which really makes it a really attractive tree actually to study and work with. There's a lot more research and experimentation required with the tree. But a great potential, and you only have to look across the world to see what it can do and how it can be used on a big scale.
Thanks, Peter. Heather, can I prompt you to say a little bit about the importance of aspen to you?
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you for having me tonight. Yeah, I think the story itself of aspen is so important, and the reason I say that is I get to meet a lot of volunteers at Dundragon, and a lot of folk are unfamiliar with aspen, and I get to do just what we're going to do tonight, talk about aspen, why it's good and why it's important for us to conserve it. And it's a really lovely response that I get from almost everyone that you speak to about aspen. It really seems to be a very tangible story that gets everyone going, and everyone wants to sink their teeth into it. And I see it as almost like a gateway tree to looking after conservation, or looking after our habitat that we have here. Really gets people interested in caring about all these amazing species that we have, and it's just a lovely tree for people to get behind.
Thanks, Heather. Andrew, would you like to add?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, so from a purely ecological perspective, the thing that I find so nice about aspen is just how biodiverse it is, and how important it is for such a massive range of species. That's always very exciting. But actually, just to expand a bit on what Peter was saying there about the things we don't know about it, I've been working quite closely with aspen at Mar Lodge since 2018, and it is full of surprises. It's a tree where if you give it an inch, it'll absolutely take a mile. Which when you're sort of working with ecological restoration or rewilding at a landscape scale, that's exactly the sort of species you want to be working with. One that's going to really boost biodiversity really quickly, but also can really do some exciting and surprising things.
Absolutely. I think there are quite a few points in the film that would warrant a bit more in-depth discussion. And so I just wanted to kick us off on a theme and we can maybe sort of flow from there. But I just wondered, in terms of aspen, so many people I think that have watched the film will be wondering, why does it so rarely flower in Scotland? And why does it spread primarily through suckering? And whether or not we have answers or we have theories, I think that would be a really interesting one to kick off with. I'll come to anyone that either wants to raise their hand or is ready to jump in.
Well, I think we don't really know, really, or we don't fully understand why aspen in Scotland doesn't flower so readily. When we look at other aspen across Europe, it doesn't suffer the same problems. So it's a bit of a conundrum. But I suppose if we could consider how woodland has been managed in Scotland over the last couple centuries and how aspen may have been a bit overlooked and unfairly discarded, and that might have over the years contributed to aspen's intention to flower. So I think there's an idea that there's a bit of a scale. Some aspen are more likely to flower than other aspens, and perhaps those who are more likely to flower didn't survive the woodland management or mismanagement that we've had in Scotland over the last couple of centuries.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I think that pretty much gets the nail on the head. I mean, there could be a climatic element. Scotland's pretty wet, which might not help aspen in some circumstances. But more to the point, I think, as Heather says, it's one of these species is kind of like an all or nothing species in all of its ecology. If you got loads of them in the landscape, or the amount that you would expect to have in a landscape like Scotland, it can probably do absolutely fine. But when you start seeing species declining, you get these sort of wicked problems like adding to the issues. And I think flowering in Scotland might well be part of that. But on the flip side of that, the one thing that aspen does do very well is sucker. So that means if you do have trees already around, then they do have this superpower of growing incredibly quickly. And they can, through suckering, respond really well to positive management, whatever that positive management may be, and on whatever scale it is. So it's not brilliant that they don't flower and don't seed particularly well in Scotland, but they do have this backup strategy, which when you work with it can really bring a lot of benefits very quickly.
Yeah, I agree. For me, this is a real conundrum, and I think it draws so much interest because of that. So, theories that I've had put to me by various people I've spoken to are that we maybe have too mild winters, our winters are perhaps too mild, and also that Scotland's aspen, as Heather was touching on, with kind of the woodland degradation that we've been through, and such a small percentage of native woodland left, that many of our aspen are perhaps so ancient that they're effectively stopping flowering now. And so, yeah, this is one that I think it'll be fascinating to see in kind of future years, more research coming through on this topic. I just wondered, Andrew, you mentioned some research that had taken place at Mar Lodge. I didn't know if that was something that you wanted to touch on just now, or.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's quite fun stuff. I'm not sure when it might be being published soon, so I'm not sure how much I can say, but I'll just say everything. We had a brilliant student last year come out and do some genetic research on some of the aspens we have at Mar Lodge. This is off the back of some of the work we've been doing, which has very excitingly been finding very small aspens, which look like seedlings, right out on the open hill, sometimes up to 1 kilometre away from nearby aspen trees. We don't really know how they got there. Could be seedlings, or it could very excitingly be very, very, very old, very, very, very small trees that have been just browsed down century after century and are now growing back up and sprouting in exciting places. Our student Basil looks at the genetic makeup of some of our aspen stands to see how closely they were related to one another. And And Basil found that one of those aspen stands was 300 meters in size. So you had clones of clones which were spreading right across the landscape over absolutely huge distances. And the average size of some of these clone stands from one side of the tree to from one tree to the furthest distant tree that was still a clone, the average size was well over 100 meters. So they can do really well in the landscape. And I think this is just a nice example of science catching up with a species that's really surprising us in some very fun ways.
Absolutely. I think it's the mystery that's keeping us all interested. I guess that maybe brings us on to another point though, which is around sort of herbivore browsing. We know that it's a pressure on aspen. We know that it's a very palatable tree. How best can we manage, herbivores to see aspen restored and across our landscapes again?
That's interesting to hear, Andrew. You've got some aspen coming up, maybe after reducing the browsing pressure at Mar Lodge. So definitely, I think ideally we want to reduce browsing pressure from deer, from sheep, to give aspen the chance to get away. They are incredibly fast growers. So if you happen to have aspen, even to protect it for a couple of years, you'll be amazed at how quickly they can really shoot off to the sky. So certainly reducing some numbers will help aspen just to spread that wee bit more.
Absolutely. So just to put a few numbers on that, back in 2018, I did a sort of survey of Mar Lodge just as we were starting seeing aspen popping up all over the place, and we thought we'd keep an eye on it and see how we were doing. We found 53 stands and about 1,500 seedlings, something like that. Saplings, sorry. 6-7 years later, we've seen a tenfold increase in seedlings and saplings in that time, and that's entirely due to reducing herbivore densities. We've done that in a couple ways. So in the north and east of the estate, we're very much going for landscape scale herbivore density reductions. And that's the areas where we're seeing these really exciting, fun new trees just sort of popping up out of the heather in places we'd have never expected to see aspen. But we do have different herbivore densities and different pressures across different parts of the estate. And so in other places, we've simply fenced fields which have aspen in, and we've taken them out of rotation for sheep and cattle for a few years, and those are responding incredibly well, incredibly quickly. But actually also, we've just been out with volunteers making small 2 meter by 2 meter fences just around some of the seedlings that are coming off of the mature trees. That works really well as well, particularly if they're rabbit. We've got a lot of mountain hares up here, so a bit of rabbit nesting around the bottom works. So there's loads of stuff you can do, either from a very small level to a very large level, that can be beneficial for aspens. The main thing that's worked at Mar Lodge has been reducing herbivore pressure. Absolutely.
Thanks, Andy. Do you have anything to say?
Yes, sorry I dropped out there, my Wi-Fi problems, and I missed the beginning of that. But in terms of protecting aspen, what we've found, aside from the conventional methods of fencing, etc., we've done a small trial co-planting with gorse actually, and obviously here in a lowland site with a lot of deer pressure, and we found that in fact the gorse grows so quickly, quite quickly, it provides that kind of natural thorny protection, and seemed to just be enough to keep the deer off, and much of a deterrent. And the aspen are romping away, whereas aspen planted out with the gorse patch completely decimated. So that sort of gives me a lot of kind of confidence in the kind of alternative to tubes and stakes and lots of infrastructure, and I think from a kind of, as we are an environmental charity, we want to kind of move away from these kind of, well, move towards more naturalistic, kind of sustainable options, really. as well as obviously deer control where it's necessary, appropriate.
Yeah, but that sounds brilliant, that particular method, actually, how would trees grow in the wild and what kind of natural protection would there be?
Yes, exactly.
Touching on kind of growing aspen and sort of planting out aspen, people might have looked into buying aspen in the past, and they might have wondered, why is it so expensive or why is it so hard to get? And I just wondered if we could touch a little bit on the methods that exist for growing on aspen and the various options. I think, Heather, this is probably your field of speciality.
Yeah, maybe split with Peter a little bit for this one, but yeah, it's unfortunate that aspen comes at a bit of a higher price than other species that we grow, but it's due to a lack of seed availability. And if we do propagate from root cuttings, it's actually quite labor intensive for the amount of trees that you can produce. So unfortunately, as you expect, that increases the cost. But we're hoping, certainly at Trees for Life at Dundragon, we are working on our seed production. And definitely the goal would be to be able to produce enough seed and or seedlings that we can share with all those interested parties. So maybe hold your horses. We'll hopefully get to you soon. But it's a great sign that it's so in demand. So everyone is asking for aspen, and we'd love to accommodate all the folk that are looking for it. But it's a good sign that people are really keen to get it out in their planting sites. So I'm sorry.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the aspen torture tunnel, as I've heard it described?
Yes.
In terms of, I think it's still a work in progress. So you're seeing different results, aren't you? Yeah.
Yeah. So I've just joined the project when it was already started. So the idea is, when you look at mass flowering years in Scotland, there tends to be a pattern where the previous year was a hot and dry spring and summer. And so you can think, well, it looks like they're flowering as a stress response. And on a smaller scale, sometimes you can see an aspen stand and maybe one tree has had some wind damage or has fallen over, and only that tree in the stand is flowering. And again, that points to a stress response. So we try and mimic that on a smaller scale, where we disrupt the bark. Just as the sap starts to flow, we disrupt the bark. And we hope that eventually the sap will all flow again and the tree will heal, the bark will be fine. But in the interim, we've caused a period of stress for the tree. And above the bark work, there'll be a concentration of all the food and the sugars, the carbohydrates that the tree can put towards flower production, instead of reaching for the sky, because they really just shoot up otherwise. So instead of doing that, they put their oomph into making flowers. And all being well, we'll get flowers the next spring, which we can collect the pollen and then paint it onto the females as well. But yes, definitely it's very much an experiment. There seems to be 1 million variables that we're sort of trying to eliminate each year, and lots of factors to work with. We think we're getting about a 40% success rate with flowering 1 or 2 years after we've done the bark work. So it'd be great to get that higher. Of course, we'd love to get it higher, but it's just it's a work in progress for sure.
Absolutely.
It's a really exciting project to be part of, though. It's so fun. It feels great.
I wondered, Peter, if you could maybe touch a little on upscaling production and some of the kind of work that you've been doing around that as well.
We've always kind of acknowledged the work that Trees for Life are doing in terms of trying to produce seed, and I think that's really important. In fact, that's obviously the most important thing to focus on. Whereas, so what we've done is taken a clonal approach, because in the south of Scotland, it's such a limited population, we can effectively go out and, as we have done, and collect every single surviving tree south of the Central Belt, you know, and it numbers something like 100 individual clones or individual trees. And I think, so for us, that's important just from a genetic conservation point of view. It can be done, so we will do it. And then using that material to kind of, to replicate, to a clone and plant out that will effectively be the future seed orchards. You know, so let nature do basically what Heather's doing eventually and get them crossing. But that's a long-term, obviously, process. So what we've been doing through support originally with the Forest Commission is actually a micropropagation process. So we've been cloning a selection, a subset of our clones in a lab. And then that's allowed us to kind of scale up production and get these clones multiplied quickly and back out into the market, as well as our own projects and into the Forest Enterprises, you know, sites. So that was really effective. And it was only enabled through, obviously, that subsidy, that's financial support by the Forest Commission at the time, because, as you say, micropropagation is very expensive. So we do sell a little, so some of our micropropagated trees on the open market, but they are, yes, significantly more expensive. But we're seeing more and more seed become available. So the big commercial nurseries do seem to have seed, but having inquired about the sources, there seems to me to be only 2 sources of seed for the entire country. And there's a stand in Strathspey that you may know, Andy, and another one in, it turns out, Carlisle. And while seed is genetically better than clones, I feel personally, just intuitively, that it's not good enough having like 2 trees flowering, and we're reliant on not just those seed forming the basis of our entire aspen production. And that's why what Heather's doing is so important, just to get more seed produced. And I believe it's through a stress mechanism, actually, that this clone in Strathspey is flowering, because apparently its roots are being damaged. I've heard through tracking is quite close to an access road or something like that, a sawmill, apparently. So I mean, that's what we're up against, you know. So yeah, it's you know, in the meantime, we could just have to kind of work with what we've got, really, and do that kind of basically promotional work to try and get more and more people thinking about aspen, and eventually kind of building up a head of steam to try and kind of get on top of these issues.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think those multiple avenues that you've described just now, you know, each of them is important in kind of looking to the future for aspen. There was one particular sort of quote of yours, Peter, from the film that I really liked, and I've quoted back at a few people. So you said, "Aspen is a blooming useful tree." And I think I just love that. It really sort of encapsulates, you know, this is obviously a native tree. It's important for biodiversity, but also there's kind of, you know, important kind of benefits in terms of, you know, the economy, in terms of commercial uses, even using it in plantation. And I just wondered if you could sort of touch on some of those, because that might be new for a lot of people to think about aspen in that sense.
Well, I think that's kind of been our focus, because we see, I think, in the conservation world, to save a species, you know, and this is really how we were founded back in 2011 and how we got original funding, because we said, well, look, to save and justify the existence of a species in this modern society, almost it has to pay its way and therefore prove an economic value, terrible to say. And of course, there's an economic value, as we know, to climate and biodiversity and et cetera, but if we can prove, as it's easy to do, that aspen is a very useful forestry tree and can create products, then I think that is a very important thing to focus on, to get, and obviously increase its popularity and its demand. And so our just desktop research is looking elsewhere, where it's grown, where it's planted, where it's used. So, okay, you can look in North America. I know it's a different species, but there's huge parallels. But closer to home, Scandinavia, Eastern Europe, we don't have to go far to see vast tracts of aspen. And where there's a big resource, you therefore have end users confident in using it and a track record and experience using aspen wood, which we just don't have. So take Estonia. One of the biggest EU industrial investments was in a huge paper mill in Estonia, supplying a lot of European paper, and they take solely aspen as a feedstock because it's a superior feedstock. It needs less bleaching. It's just a better quality. So that's one industry, one example. And there's umpteen other uses. And the important thing is that, of course, aspen is just a fast grower. It's a productive tree given the chance. If it's protected in those early days, then it will romp away, as we know. And what we've looked at is systems around the world where they're mixed silvicultural systems. And when you look at these being practiced, again, North America and Canada, take Alberta, they plant vast tracts of mixed plantations. So they're planting broadleaves with the spruce. And what is the most popular broadleaf? It's aspen. And there's the area of aspen spruce mixed silviculture is about 20% of Alberta forest cover. And you can imagine that's a pretty big area, in fact, bigger than the size of Scotland. And that's the amount of aspen spruce. And aspen in this country, we reckon, can keep up with Sitka. But the important thing is that all aspens aren't the same, and there's that clonal diversity. And because we've always taken a clonal approach, as I explained before, another fascinating aspect of aspen, as you guys know, is that there's huge genetic variation between these surviving clones in the wild. And when we grow them in a nursery, we see that. And one of the aspects of that is obviously growth rates, form. So the important thing, if you were trying to create a forestry tree, is to start selectively selecting the superior clones that we can say, well, these are potential productive forestry clones that we can start cloning and mass producing, and then sort of market as sort of plus clones. And again, we're not reinventing the wheel here. I mean, this is done in I believe Latvia, where they take they've already selected the best clones and they're producing them. So it's the best clones that can really, deliver a great potential in forestry, I believe. And then we've taken that a step further again, and we've identified triploids. Not to get too deeply into the technicalities of that, but they're naturally occurring triploids in the aspen population, which means basically an extra chromosome. So you get giganticism, basically. This was found in Sweden in the 30s, a giant aspen, Populus tremula gigas. And there's a sample, a specimen of this in St Andrews Botanic Gardens. So when I stumbled across that really opened my eyes. I went, hang on a minute, aspen's great anyway. It's fast, it's big, it's tall. This one's a quantum leap beyond that. So, we've got now a project focusing on identifying triploids in the natural population and cloning them.
It's fascinating, Peter. Does anyone else want to touch on that? I think Peter's done a great job of covering quite a lot of it, but do you have any other comments on the commercial or sort of practical uses of aspen?
Not massively, only to say that one of the nice things about the ecology of aspen is this safety in numbers approach. It's this if you can get enough of it, it overwhelms local herbivore densities. That's the whole strategy of it. So it's a real all or nothing plant. And the problem we've got in Scotland is it's currently at nothing, and getting from nothing to the all bit takes a bit of thought. It can be done because aspen grows very quickly and all the rest of it, but we're stymied somewhat by how little of the resource there is left. But it's a bit like it's like pushing a rock up a hill. You get it to the top and then it rolls down and you get a sort of snowball effect. It's all very exciting, but pushing it up to the top of the hill is the problem, and that's where we're currently at. So if we can get aspen to a certain point, we'll be able to look after itself and provide us lots of benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, that particular example you gave, Peter, of the kind of the mixed silviculture of maybe Sitka and aspen, you know, that's particularly inspiring. You think about disease in the future, you know, we're going to face all these challenges, but also just, you know, the biodiversity impact that you would have by bringing aspen into a plantation like that. You totally change the kind of ecology. And I think that is, yeah, I would love to see, love to see more of that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I'm going to move us on to the audience Q&A just now, because we do have quite a few questions that have come in from the audience. And I've got one here that's been sort of repeated, actually, so it's obviously a top interest. So two people have asked, could we stress aspen in the wild in the hope that seed is created and naturally spread to allow more regeneration? Does anybody want to touch on that one?
Quite easy. Just speed up the spread of beavers. That's what we need. And I said that in the film, didn't I? Yeah. A natural disturbance, but we don't have enough disturbance in our landscape. We have sterilized, stable environments because that benefits human existence. And we only heard recently about boars spreading across Scotland. That's one example. We need boars and beavers creating that disturbance. Of course, it creates seed beds when it does, but I mean, you've got the potential, obviously, of stressing, you know, the trees as well, I think.
So we did, I think it might have been after you recommended we try this, Peter. We did try stressing some roots at Mar Lodge on one of our bigger stands of aspens, and I'm sorry to say we didn't monitor it properly. So this isn't, you know, a paired control before, after, t-tests, all the rest of it. But yeah, it does kind of work. So you can stress trees just by scraping at the roots of it, and that does cause extra suckering. It didn't cause extra flowering though, so that was just a way of creating even more suckers than we previously had.
I would be wary trying to stress in the wild, just in case, you know, it doesn't work out well and something happens to the last of this clone that we might have. So when we when we stress in the nursery, they are clones of wild aspen. So unfortunately, if it ever doesn't work, it's not the end of the world or not the end of the line for that aspen clone. So just be careful if you are thinking about it.
Absolutely, and did I say one of the trees that we planted about 12 years ago locally here actually was blown over, and it is absolutely covered in catkins. It was in the spring, but they were all obviously very accessible because the tree was horizontal. You know, so there's a win-win there. But I'm not advocating necessarily pushing trees out, but that tree will probably re-sprout anyway from, you know, its base. It's not entirely dead. So yeah.
Absolutely. I think somebody was sort of commenting on that in the chat as well about, you know, gales in kind of recent weeks that we've seen, and, you know, that might have an impact in kind of flowering in the future. Just touching on what you were saying, Peter, another question in the Q&A is about the success of aspen and whether that might be tied to expanding beaver reintroductions. So you mentioned the kind of the importance of disturbance. You're obviously seeing that as quite a positive thing. I suppose other people might have fears or concerns around that. I just wondered, yeah, if you want to cover that a little bit more.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't have direct experience of beavers, but from what I understand and read and speaking to others and attending a beaver conference a few years ago, etc., and actually speaking to the Ramsays at Banff Estate, of course, they're a great place to study this because they have beavers and aspen, and Paul Ramsay has been studying the interaction over many years. And interestingly, he finds that he said, well, maybe I was worried that the beavers would overexploit the aspen, but no, of course they've co-evolved. Beavers are intelligent creatures. And interestingly, what they did, they grazed the aspen right down, they coppiced it as they do, but they left that stand for 8 years. They didn't return it. So they let the trees grow up and grow up and grow up until they went back. And that's really interesting because from what I've read, aspen's a terrible tree for short rotation coppice. It's too short rotation. And if you cut it too regularly, it will deplete, the reserves in the roots, and the thing will die. It's not like willow from that point of view. So maybe the beavers are telling us what the perfect rotation is for a coppice system. You see, but so I thought that was fascinating. I think it's kind of good example,
Absolutely. I think I have to confess, for me, my sort of gateway to aspen was sort of through beavers. So I've always been, fascinated with beaver reintroduction, and through that learned more about aspen because it's such a favourite of the beavers. For where I am in Tayside, lots of beaver signs around here, and I've seen stands of aspen where mature trees have been felled, and you see then the suckers start to come up, but also seeing suckering coming then off those as well as the beavers start to sort of nip and take bits of that. So I don't think it is a sort of a clear cut, this is a herbivore that's grazing and therefore, all the aspen will be gone. It's like you say, there's that evolutionary relationship that we have to sort of sometimes step back and observe. And I don't think that's to say there's nothing we can do. We can certainly protect trees where needed, but I do think it's quite an interesting one to think about.
As you've all said, the answer is it's complex, but it's a numbers game. The more aspen you have, and the more beavers you have, of course, and a beaver won't always fell a tree. Sometimes it'll have a nibble, or it'll maybe ring bark, just as you're doing, Heather. So you've got various types of beaver effect, an interaction, and some of that might stress the trees to sucker, but some might flower. It just depends. What, and we don't really know what it takes to get that perfect situation for flowering.
To flip the beaver thing round on its head as well. I mean, we unfortunately we don't have them in Deeside at the minute, but one of the things we can think of from an aspen perspective, and this is certainly something we're doing at Mar Lodge, we're trying to get as much aspen away right now as possible because we have every hope in the fullness of time that beavers will find their way here. One potential way of mitigating beaver impacts, particularly on amenity trees, just have some more aspen in the ground. I mean, it's their favorite thing in the world. So it's just another reason to be thinking more about getting aspen in the ground and in the landscape. I guess our slight concern would be around the interactions between deer and beavers in certain landscapes, particularly in places where broadleaf species are already a bit on the low side. That would be my one caveat, but that's just because I've been working with trees and large herbivores for a long time. It says more about me than it does about the beavers.
No, but I think that's just a key point of forward planning and resilience and trying to get more trees away while we can, so that we're kind of ready, that we're future proofed essentially. I think that's the key thing. We've got another question here, and it says, with the situation for aspen so critical in Scotland, should we be looking further afield, for example, southwest Norway, to boost the genetic resilience and available planting stock for us? Don't know if anybody wants to take that one.
We're not, certainly we're not looking to that at the moment. At Trees for Life, I'm not sure about you folks, but I think the focus is on protecting what we have here in Scotland and trying to protect the genetic diversity that we have here in Scotland before we think about bringing anything in from the likes of Norway. And just partly because there'll be genetic resilience within all the different clones that we have here in Scotland, and they'll, as Peter says, there seems to be a massive genetic variety within aspen, and different clones will have adapted to different areas where they have found themselves growing, and we want to work within that ourselves and not reach too far whilst we've still got aspen growing here. So that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think. Okay, I mentioned the example in the south, but I think you guys in the Highlands are a bit more spoilt than we are, and I mean, it's well under-recorded, I think you would agree, in the Highlands, because, I mean, you only have to drive up, as I regularly do, to Sutherland, and every crag has an aspen. The problem is getting to them, you know, if you're wanting to collect them. So, you know, it's more common than we think in these hot spots like Strathspey. I mean, we've got a lot more than Iceland. They've got 6. But I'll just add a wee aside that we contributed some of our clonal material to researchers from Umeå University in Sweden, who were doing a kind of Scandinavian and into Russia kind of project, and wanted some Scottish aspen material to do genetic mapping. And I believe what they found is that the Scottish population is most related to the sort of southern Baltic sort of area. But there is a continuum. So genetically, it might not be the worst thing to do. You know, they're not completely separate populations. Obviously, post Ice Age, you had the Doggerland, etc. So you could go into a lot of kind of detail about that, you know, and but I just don't think we have to, you know.
That's fascinating. I hadn't realised that. From our perspective, I mean, introducing stock from the continent is nothing new in Scotland. In Capercaillie, for example, but also here at Mar Lodge, we're working with Royal Botanic Gardens Edinburgh on alpine south thistle conservation, and that's one where problems within the Scottish population due to genetic introgression was basically proven. So the way forwards has been to introduce Norwegian stuff, and that's gone really well. And you can see the difference between the healthy stuff from Scandinavia next to the really stunted, scrotty stuff from Scotland, which is all a bit introgressed. From a genetic perspective, for our Mar Lodge aspen, thanks to our really interesting project that we did last year, that seems to suggest that our aspen population is actually quite genetically diverse, and certainly more so than other populations that have been sampled in England and Wales. So we're quite pleased with that. But one of our sort of ethoses, I guess, at Mar Lodge is to try to do as little intervention as possible, and then sort of ratchet things up if the science shows us that we should be doing so, and we have a good moral and ethical reason for doing so, which tends to mean that we try to be patient about these things, and we try to do as little as possible. And that certainly has paid dividends, I would say, for aspen, because we are now seeing that there is more aspen in the landscape than we thought there was. That's helped us to realise that perhaps we don't need to get too much more genetic stock in from other countries.
Absolutely. It's a fascinating one to think about, isn't it? Sort of the options that we have before us and whether we should be patient or, you know, take a more drastic measure. We've got a totally different question here now, which is, would you encourage nature restoration and biodiversity projects to plant some aspen with the view to harvest for timber and economic return, as well as the biodiversity benefits? Does anybody have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, definitely. Because as I said before, you know, that I think that will just get more aspen planted and you can sustainably harvest it. And I think, like any ecosystem, like forest ecosystem, the more diverse, the better. So if you get, you know, depending on how you practice your forestry, different stages, small coops, you know, etc., coppicing in one area, different age classes, you know, that's a rich environment. You don't want a kind of homogeneous stand of aspen at the end of the day. So, you know, forestry operations can just kind of mimic nature from that point of view. I mean, there's an example I would love to visit near Alcester, I think, in the Midlands in England, and it's an aspen. It's coppice with standards, and it's a managed aspen wood, which I'm quite fascinated to see. But that could provide really biodiverse sort of benefits, you know, having the two working together. Maybe why aren't we practicing that here? Why, you know, I think it's a forestry commission plantation, so that's quite fascinating.
Yeah, it sounds like there's more sort of knowledge that can be shared still, but also, you know, just thinking there about that question, whether sort of supply, you know, a chain needs to be developed so there's a clear kind of pathway to, you know, growing commercial aspen and sort of knowing where to take that. Unfortunately, folks, we are running out of time. We're getting towards the end of our session. So I will start to bring the Q&A to a close now. We do have a few more questions in there that we can potentially type some answers up to as well. But just thank you to our panelists for joining, for sharing their insights. And I've enjoyed, you know, listening and discussing it all with you. It's been, yeah, fascinating. So thanks very much for that. I will just quickly sort of touch on, from our point of view, the importance of fundraising to help us deliver more events. So, you know, this is an event that we're looking to run hopefully in future. We're going to flash up our QR code on the screen, so you can hopefully scan your camera to learn more there. And just for everyone's awareness, tomorrow we'll be following up by sharing a recording of this webinar, but also a short questionnaire. And I would really encourage everyone to fill in the questionnaire. It's just 4 questions, but it will allow us to determine the usefulness of this session and also to target future action to where the needs are. So think about, you know, other events, other training and learning that we can develop. Please don't forget to make use of the hashtag Painting Scotland Yellow to ensure that your posts reach a wide audience. And if you want to find out more, you can go to our website, which is just going to be coming on the screen shortly, and my email address will be on there as well. Thank you again to everyone for joining. I hope you've had a good evening, you've enjoyed it, and yeah, please feedback via the questionnaire. Have a good evening. Thank you.